Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello, beautiful humans. Thaís Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I have been promising you all to do an episode on marriage since I got married in January. So I thought I would finally offer some of my thoughts here. I've been married now for, 7 months? So I'm not necessarily the quote-unquote expert on marriage, but I can certainly share my opinions, my experiences, my thoughts, how I navigated the experience of wanting to be married, getting married, and being married, and some thoughts that I'm sitting with now in terms of thinking about children. I also do bring in my perspective as a marriage and family associate therapist. But I want to be clear that this is stemming from predominantly my experience in a heteronormative coupling. Okay, so please discern what I share with you here from that lens. So let's talk about, let's start at the beginning. Back when I was in my early 20s and I was dating, I felt a lot of pressure in every new relationship to know quite quickly if he was the one. I think we tend to go into relationships really wanting, if we carry this lens, this cultural expectation of marriage, of belonging within a marriage, it makes a lot of sense why we go into every relationship essentially looking at them like, are you the one? Are you the one? Are you the one? And I find that when we put so much pressure on a new relationship for us to know whether or not they are the one, a couple things happen. One, we overlook the ways in which the relationship isn't feeling right because we are so wanting them to be right. Yeah, we want the relationship to be the one. We want it to work. And so we overlook the ways in which things aren't quite right at the beginning, thinking about it in the long term. The other thing that tends to happen is because we put so much pressure on this other person and we put so much pressure on ourselves that we just don't enjoy the process of getting to know somebody. We're constantly filtering all experiences from, is this good? Is this bad? Is this good? Is this bad? And there's no way that that type of pressure can create a supportive, exciting beginning of a relationship. But I certainly experienced that. And I remember so many times in beginning relationships, driving myself crazy with this pressure of needing to know if they are the one or not. And ultimately, somebody will be the person that you're going to want to spend more and more time with. But I don't know about this idea of the one. If we're talking about it from a spiritual perspective, I know that there's so many different ways to see this. There's twin flames, there's soulmates, there's this idea that there's one person out there that's made for you. But I'm not sure that I really believe that. I think that there are many people out there that would be right for you in any moment in time. The person that was right for me in high school and college isn't the person that's right for me in where I'm at in my life right now. We have phases, we have moments, we have times when certain things are right and then they're no longer right. So I don't know if I believe that there's one person out there that's meant to fulfill this big hole in our hearts, that if we could just meet that person, if they are the one, then everything will be whole. And I think that that's a lot of the cultural conditioning placed on women from a very early age, is that your other person will kind of fill that hole. They will complete you. Yes, we even use this language in love. They will complete you. They are your better half. There's a hope, I think, when we're dating that the right person will fill the void of our insignificance, that we will finally belong. But there's also nothing more, well, there are many things that are painful, but there's a particular type of pain when we feel really alone within a relationship, isn't there? Relationships do not necessarily take away these deeper pains within us, the sense of not belonging, the sense of hopelessness that some of us carry, the sense of loneliness. It can certainly be nourishing and supportive and wonderful, but even in the right relationship, you may still feel alone at times, and that is quite a normal human experience, because relationships aren't going to take away those internal experiences, because those internal experiences come from something much older within you. So while yes, I am less lonely because I live with somebody than I would be if I lived alone, the sense of feeling alone in the world is something that is much deeper than any relationship, and no relationship can truly tend to that place. So I think that there's, the theme of this episode is that so much of the pressure that we experience, the cultural pressure, is the literal antithesis of creating a thriving, healthy, wonderful relationship with another human. There's so much cultural expectations about what that relationship should look like, what the rules of that relationship should be, how often we talk about the issues of that relationship with other people, right? We're talking about heteronormative culture here. We're talking about homophobia and transphobia and the ways in which we try to police each other's sexuality and gender identity. I'm talking about the ways in which our culture for hundreds of years have attempted to define our behavior. Men can sleep around, women cannot sleep around. I mean, it's just endless. And we can't separate cultural expectations when we're talking about something like marriage and children, because I think that this is the place that it plays out the loudest. Because we, without really checking it, can really internalize this narrative, it can add a lot of pressure on ourselves to try to find the one. Yes, the one that is going to be the one. I prefer to look at relationships, particularly something like marriage, as the right person for you right now. And that's not to say that growth and change can't happen. And that's not to say that in 10, 20 years, it may be the right person in a different way. I'm not talking about the expendability of a marriage. I'm trying to offer a different way of thinking about the pressure that we put ourselves, that this person has to be the one and has to fulfill all of these emotional expectations that we have and that we place on other people. And then we become so sorely disappointed when they don't meet that expectation. So much of our relational wounds, our relational challenges, our developmental trauma comes into play when it comes to long-term relationships. And I think if we don't tend to the relational trauma, if we don't tend to the ways we've learned how to navigate relationships, then our relationships are just going to be a feeding ground for all of that stuff. But that's not the topic of this episode. Okay, so another question that I tend to see and I tend to hear a lot is, what if you're ready but they aren't? Your partner isn't ready. You're ready, your partner isn't ready. This I see a lot in straight couples, because I think women, because we're so conditioned to want to get married, we are ready faster than men. who tend to, the way I see a lot of men making these big decisions is through checklists, right? Like they need to fulfill a certain checklist of things that they want to see. They want to have a certain amount of money saved up, or they want to have a house, or they want to have this before this type of decision. This is true for marriage. This is true for babies. At least this is what I've seen. And I know that I'm generalizing here, but very broadly speaking, women don't make this type of checklist as much as men do in heteronormative couples. And so what tends to happen is the woman is ready and the man isn't. And so then what happens? How do you navigate that? This is where I can't emphasize enough the importance of having continual conversations about expectations. Once it becomes more obvious that this relationship is becoming real, if the two of you decided that you want to choose monogamy, then it becomes it needs to be a continual conversation of what the expectations are, what the future is, what is the goals. And it's not that you have to have a strict timeline, but you do want to be on the same page about roughly what you envision for yourself and for the relationship. Because if you want to have 10 children before the age of 30 and you're, 26 now, not only is that feasibly impossible, but I'm just saying that if you want to have a lot of children and you want to get married very quickly and your partner wants to have only one child or doesn't want to have children and doesn't ever see themselves getting married, these are important conversations. And sometimes what we think we want isn't what we end up really wanting. Some of us have these weird and layered relationships with this idea of marriage. We think it means certain things. We think it represents certain things that we can work through and think about. And so part of this is allowing ourselves to change our minds depending on our partner and depending on what's important in the relationship. But also a part of this is knowing that there's some things that are just going to be important to the other person, and we have to decide how much of that we can or want to internalize. For example, maybe your partner doesn't see the importance of marriage. They don't get the importance. What's more important for them is children. And they don't see the point necessarily of getting married. They don't get the institution of marriage, for example. And let's say that you definitely do want to get married before you have children, that feels really important for you. It may be a continual conversation between the two of you of if your partner is willing to at least think about it, and if you're willing to think about it, and where is the line? If you are adamant that you are not going to have children before you get married, then that's going to be a really important point of conversation for the two of you to discuss, because if it's that type of non-negotiable, if it's that type of boundary that you're not flexible on, and the other person says the same thing, then maybe this isn't going to be the relationship that is going to carry you into the future that you want. Some things are negotiable, some things aren't. And the only way that we'll really find out is by continuing to talk about it. Some, people are adamant that they want to get married, and then they fall into a relationship where the other person really doesn't want to, and they realize, that's okay, because at least I'm in a relationship with this person. Being in a relationship with this person is more important than the idea of marriage. Some people see it as like, this person really sees that marriage is really, really important, and I don't have as many opinion about it. So I'm going to get married because I want to make this other person happy. And I know that I'm going to commit fully, right? That I am not only going to give this person the marriage that they want, but I'm also going to fully give in to the idea of marriage and want to get married. So I'm not saying that it's trying to make you do something you don't want to do. It's just rather a conversation of, is there any flexibility in your heart? So much of relationship is about meeting each other. I don't like the idea of compromise, because in my mind, compromise feels like a lose-lose. Neither person is really getting what they want. So I'm not the biggest fan. And I say that with an umbrella, brush strokes, because yes, of course, there are ways in which I compromise daily. But generally, I think we use compromise as a way to kind of stop the conversation, right? Okay, I'll do this, you do this, boom. Now we're not supposed to have any feelings about it anymore. And I want to remind us that we're allowed to continue to talk about things and continue to reevaluate. And maybe you'll get to a point where it won't feel like you're giving something up in order to offer something that your partner wants. Okay, so what if you're ready and they aren't? Well, you'll have to talk about it and figure out how flexible you are and how flexible they are. For me, I knew that getting married was something that was of critical importance to me. And I held firm in that. And I wasn't willing to change my mind on that. And I wasn't very flexible on that. And it's important that when we know what we want, that we notice where we start to feel guilty for what we want, because that's where resentment starts to come in, isn't it? Where we're like, okay, I know what I want. And then the other person, let's say they have different opinions, and then we start feeling guilty for still standing up for what we want. Notice that, because the guilt isn't necessary here. You're allowed to stand up for what you want and to be in continual conversation about how that's going to work in your relationship. Okay, so another big question I get around this topic is, well, then how do you know? Like, how do you know that this is the right person for you? How do you know that you want to commit the rest of your life to this person? Now, I want to be clear. I don't look at marriage as committing the rest of my life blindly. I hold my wedding vows like this. I will be in this. I will work on this with you. I will be here in this with you until it is no longer working and we both decide that it is no longer working. So it feels to me less of like this prison sentence of you're going to be in this forever, and more of a day-to-day commitment and decision to be in it with the other person until it no longer makes sense. There's no shame in divorce. There's no shame in ending relationships. It doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just where relationships go. There's so much that we can't predict that may happen in 5 years and 10 years, where the relationship may no longer make sense for who you are at that point in time, or who they are in that point in time. And I'm not going to hold myself to this guilt and shame and old school way of looking at marriage, that like divorce is something that only happens to the weak. I'm also not going to run and get divorced at any moment of trouble. I anticipate there will be hard times. I will anticipate that there are going to be times when things are going to feel really rocky, because that's part of being in a long-term relationship. Like this, it's an inevitable part that we don't often talk about, is that relationships are going to get hard. Things are going to get rubbed up. And in fact, that's how you know that you're in relationship with a whole sovereign person. If there's no conflict, if there's no challenge in your relationship, it means that somebody is people pleasing the fuck out of the relationship and stewing in the resentment. Conflict is healthy. Conflict is normal. Rupture and repair is an essential part of any healthy relationship. And so hard times are going to just be a part. Now, some people may argue that like you get to dictate if it's hard or not. I don't know. Sometimes shit just happens, right? A family member dies and now suddenly you have to decide, you're caretaking another family member. Suddenly you're forced to move out of the state that you never thought you'd move out of. I mean, you just don't know how life is going to take you. Things are going to get hard. And I'm not advocating for dipping out of your marriage the minute things get hard. I am saying that one of the really important perspectives for me when thinking about my marriage vows and thinking about what I'm committing to is that I'm not going to just stay sucked into something that just isn't right and isn't working. But that decision, that moment is not going to come like that. It's going to require time. It's going to require commitment and conversation and couples therapy, and it will be a decision that will be made mutual. Okay. So back to the question of like, well, how do you know? How do you know if this is the right person for me? I think some people would say that you feel it. You just know it. You just know that like this is your person. And it's a really wonderful feeling of like just this deep kind of bone knowing like this is the person. I think there's certain qualities that are more important to me and qualities that are less important to me that I was thinking about and holding loosely. I hold it all loosely when thinking about my person. There's certain kind of developmental traumas that I carry that it's really, really, really important in my relationship that it doesn't activate. Let me make it super practical here. Something that's really important for me in my relationship is consistency and reliability. This is just part of what I need for functioning. Now, one would argue that, you have to do your own healing work so that you don't need that from people. Couldn't agree more. However, I get so activated and so dysregulated and disoriented when my intimate partner isn't reliable or consistent that just a healthy relating just can't exist. And this is just my limitation. This is just where I'm at right now. It may not be where I'm at 10 years from now. It's just where I'm at right now. So this is kind of a quote unquote non-negotiable that was really important for me to look for in a partner. Someone who's reliable, who does what he says he's going to do, who shows up and in committed, consistent way. And I found that in my person, which is wonderful. So there are some things that are really important. And then there are other things where if he never changes, I'm okay with. And that is a really important thing to think about when it comes to relationships that are more long-term. If this person doesn't change, can I live with this? It's not implying that they're not going to change or that they can't change. That's not true. People do change. They can change. And hopefully in the relationship, you both will change. If that is your priority or value or goal in your relationship, of course. For me, it is. I think growth is really important. And that was a really important characteristic that I was, looked for and kind of found in my person. But at the same time, if we marry for the potential, we're going into some dangerous, resentful-filled terrain here. Because if we're marrying or getting into a relationship, hoping that they will change and they don't, you're not going to be, you're not going to be in a relationship that's dynamic and fulfilling. It just breeds resentment. We can't go into a relationship with who we hope the person will be. We have to have that reality principle of being in the relationship with who the person is. And this is hard. This comes up all the time in my coaching work. And this is something that I discuss quite often with my clients, is how often we are in relationship with an idea of the person and not the actual person. This happens. It's not that this is an anomaly if this happens to you, but what we can do is catch it as often as possible and understand it so that slowly but surely we can kind of get ourselves into a space of reality. It's fascinating how difficult being in reality actually is for most of us in ways that we avoid actually being in reality. And so much of our healing work is guiding us and supporting us to be able to tolerate reality, because it can be very, very difficult. And so, continuing to find your way into relationship with who the person really is instead of who you want them to be, who you hope them to be, or who you think that they are, is a long-term kind of supportive relationship goal. Yes. Now, ultimatums don't tend to work. And I think it's really important that we think about ultimatums as a boundary setting. An ultimatum is ultimately you saying, here is my boundary. You either respect this boundary or there will be consequences. And that happens. That's an important part of boundary setting, is that there are consequences for your boundary being violated. But if we use this tool too often, if we use ultimatums too often, well, it may lead to the other person feeling a lot of resentment, which, can be worked through and can be talked about. But we want to be using these types of really strong ultimatums or boundaries very lightly, particularly when it comes to whether or not somebody is committing to you. If you are in a relationship for a period of time and it just seems like that you're not on the same page with the other person in terms of when the next steps are, you two need to continue. You need to talk about it. You need to talk about it and be on the same page about it. It's this, I watch these TikToks of these gals hinting at how long they've been dating their guy without getting engaged, right? And they hint it and they put rings and things and everywhere. And it's funny and it makes for a good TikTok, right? But it's not a really good relational strategy. The relational strategy that we need to implement here is to communicate and to be in understanding of each other's position, to take each other in and to really think about what is going to work for both of you. Because it's not that he just holds the key here and like you're at his mercy until he decides that he is going to bestow upon you your marriage. That's not how this works. You're both committing, you're both in it, and you both have to think about how you want to engage in this next process of your life together. Ultimately, you can, if you are the woman, even if you think you are in a more traditional place of wanting the man to propose, you can propose, or you can certainly talk about it. The decision doesn't have to be him getting on his knees, buying you a surprise ring, and boom, shaka boom, you're married, right? The more modern approach to love is for there to be more conversation. If it's a complete surprise that the person that's proposing to you, if there's no idea, well, I mean, that's a sign of something, right? Like, it's not terrible, it's not bad, but maybe there's some space in the relationship for there to be a little bit more conversations, because thinking about marriage should be something you do together. Coming into it and understanding it and thinking about what you two want from a marriage is a really important part of getting married. So how do you know? I don't know. I think it depends on each person. It depends on what feels right for each person and their past and what they want. But at the end of the day, there is no rush. If you don't know quite yet, you don't have to force yourself to know something before you're ready. You just may need more time and space together. And number two, sometimes I think we put so much pressure on having to make this quote unquote right decision that it's not really about making the right decision, but just the right now decision. It's just about the next step. What is the next step? What is the next step? And you will make it right for you. Like, you are going to go into it and figure it out. And, hopefully you are, thinking about getting married to a partner who wants to figure it out with you. So it's not about, this is again, this old paradigm of like, they ask and and then you say yes and then you get married. But I want to remove this, kind of it being bestowed upon us, like men are saving us from ourselves, and really think about this as a relationship where the two of you are in it together and you have to think about these things together. It was very important for me once I got engaged that we really thought about our wedding together. And luckily he was on par with it, but I don't know. There is, of course, a certain element where a woman may love the event planning, or the man, may love the event planning, and the other person doesn't like the event planning aspect of it. And so one person takes lead, but ultimately the celebration should include both of you, and it should feel like it's both of you coming together. And all of that comes with conversations and being in it and talking about it together. Okay. So we got engaged, and I was surprised by a couple things that happened after we got engaged. One, the relationship felt more solid. It felt like we're now tied together in a more real way. And I actually felt that way more once we got engaged than once we got married. I feel like the engagement was like the big thing for me. When we were thinking about getting engaged, he was grappling with it, and I was grappling with it. And a really important part of it for me was to really think about, could I propose? Like, yes, I wanted the more traditional thing. I wanted him to propose, but ultimately, could I propose? Could I be the one to take that risk and ask him for marriage? And when I really entertained that question, I was suddenly now confronted with all of the feelings and things that I needed to process before I could say yes to his proposal. Does that make sense? I think sometimes we women fall into this passive role in life that we just expel. It's, there was a name for it that I used a while ago. It's a state of complacency or we're just kind of expecting things to just happen to us. And I do understand how cultural this is, but also we don't have to be that way anymore. We get to decide. We get to take an active role in our lives. And so even if you want your male partner to propose to you, there are things for you to grapple with. And I invite you to really be with those things. And the way that I thought about it was thinking about my proposal. How would I do it? How would I propose? What would it look like? What would it mean for me to put myself out there in that way? And again, because of cultural pressures and expectations, I got engaged in my 30s, in my early 30s. And I think culturally, we have certain timelines, don't we, of like when things are supposed to take place. And I certainly watched so many people that I knew from high school get married way before me. And I had to really grapple with, is this marriage coming from a place of wanting to keep up, wanting to be with the Jonases, wanting to make sure that I was on track the way, because I was behind? Or was this marriage really coming out of my own desire to make this commitment with this human? And these are the questions that only we can know, right? Like no one else can tell us. We are the ones that have to really sit with and grapple with this. But it's an important thing to grapple with because it is no joke how internalized the expectation is from our culture, from our family, especially if we live in certain cultures that really promote this idea of marriage and really pushes on it. I have so many clients that really struggle with this. They're in unconventional marriages, or they are, they don't want to get married, and their families are really struggling with that, and they have to really face this really difficult task of standing for what they believe and standing for what they want rather than what other people want from them. And this leads, closely to the topic I also hear a lot of women grapple with is creating a wedding that they want versus what their family wants. And, I can only tell you this. At the end of the day, you're the one that has to live your life, right? You're the only one that has to deal with the consequences, because at the end of the day, your family get to go into their lives. They get to go and fall asleep in their beds, and you're the one that has to lie in the bed that they made. If you let them run your life, you're the only one that's going to be dealing with the consequences of it. And so you have to decide what consequences you're willing to tolerate. What is right for you versus what you can bear. There are certain things that maybe it doesn't really matter much to you and you have no problems letting other people take control of it. But notice if you're doing this with all of your life, because how we do anything is how we do most things. And this goes back to this idea of being complacent or in a state of expectation, like just expecting things to happen to us. We can actually take charge. And I really encourage you to make your ceremony, make your wedding be how you and your relationship is. Sure, it may feel sucky to be later than, your friends. But at the end of the day, if you get stuck in a marriage that you're not happy with, you're the one that has to live that, not your friends. Your wedding is a symbol. It's a ritual. It's a symbolic representation of this next step in your marriage. And that means you get to really think about how you want to make this ritual meaningful for you and your partner. I know a lot of people try to diminish the importance of weddings and ceremony, and I think we have stripped our culture of so many rituals, and that any ritual now can look like too much. And I think therefore we put so much emphasis on the rituals we do have. But I think ritual is a really important part of the human experience, and we can add ritual to anything, and especially something like getting married, right? Bringing two people together in this both legal commitment and also spiritual and energetic commitment. So thinking about this ritual is important because it's not necessarily about what everyone else needs it to look or wants it to look, but about how you and your person are going to step into this new space together. For some people, it's really important that family and friends are there. They want the more traditional wedding. They want the bridesmaids and the groomsmen, and they want the bachelor and the bachelorette, right? Like, they want these things because it's really important to be celebrated and seen by the people in their lives. For some people, those who have small families or don't have a lot of close people due to circumstances or life, it may not feel as important. And what may feel all the more important is that the two of you spend personal time really commemorating and memorializing this special experience. The beautiful thing about wedding and ritual is that it can really be as big or as small as you want it to be. But make sure that the focus is on how you're commemorating this step together rather than thinking about it as some sort of party for other people that have nothing to do with you. When I was planning and thinking about my wedding, the biggest feedback I heard from married couples or people who went through ceremonies is that so often the ceremony was about everybody else but them. That it was about entertaining people and taking in other people's decisions and had nothing to do with them. I have one couple who did their own private ceremony where they got married legally. They signed the documents and they did that just with the two of them and the officiant. And then they did a bigger ceremony and a bigger wedding with friends and family at another time. But they got to have both. They got to have both the meaningful, slow, intimate moment with each other, and they got to memorialize it in front of their friends and family. So that's an option too. You just have to think about, like, what are your values? What are important to you? Maybe finances is a really important facet for you. It certainly was for us, especially in California. The cost of weddings and we really had to think about, like, how do we want to use our money? How do we want to use this expense, this time, this energy? What do we want to build? What do we want to create? And we ultimately decided to elope, and we eloped in Joshua Tree, and it was really beautiful. And it was exactly what we both valued and wanted in our relationship. The date was very important to me. The dress wasn't as important to me, but the suit was important to him. The flowers were important to me. I really wanted to make sure that we were both involved and that it was both of our personalities going into this special time and experience together. I know that it's very hard to navigate people's expectations. I know it is. The pressures from the family is real. But at the end of the day, you don't have to take it in. Okay. The things that culture find important about weddings and marriage are not actually what is important. There's a lot of cultural things that we see in movies and media, how little a couple fights, that's seen as important. What else is seen as important? The big glamorous wedding is seen as important, and a big glamorous honeymoon is seen as important. Having the way your family looks, this kind of environment is important, but that's not what's actually important. Emotional intimacy is what's important. True intimacy between partners is what's important. Continual communication and willingness to be in tension together is what's important. And, that's where relational conversations come in that's just not talked about in our greater culture. And I think that that's misleading because it makes us think that the certain things are wrong in our relationships, when actually it's because we're using the wrong measuring stick. Yes? And so I always recommend for any newly engaged couple to go through some type of marriage counseling, to go through a few sessions, 5 to 10 sessions with someone who does marriage counseling, who can help the two of you make sure that you're really thinking through about certain values and goals and ideals, that you two really know each other. I mean, luckily my husband and I are both therapists, so we have a pretty good idea of each other and we're pretty good communicators. But that's not, that's an anomaly. And we still struggle, don't get me wrong. But I don't see the benefit in having to figure out everything in a relationship alone. Bring in support, have someone that you can talk to and grapple with things about the relationship with. For example, like I've said, like timeline, there's also a lot of like questionnaires online that you can search for. Finances. How are you two going to handle finances? Maybe you've been living together and handling finances together for a long time and you're pretty capable of that. But like, how does one person handle savings versus the other person handle, spending, right? I mean, all of these things are worth talking about. You just want to make sure that you are on the same page. And more than anything, what marriage counseling should teach you both to do is how to work through things together, how to navigate conflict together. That's the most important skill, because at the end of the day, anything can be figure outable within the relationship if the two people continue to commit and come into it. Not saying that figuring it out means staying together, but things can be figured out if the two of you stay committed to talking about it and being in it together. And a marriage counselor can really help you in these conversations and help you in understanding each other and how each other deals with things. I could not recommend it more. And I'm so surprised by how little people do this. Again, because I think we have this expectation that we don't talk about our relationship with strangers. But the thing is, most of the times when a couple goes into couples therapy, they're going into it way too late. There's significant ruptures and resentments and really shitty things that are already built into the relationship. And it takes a long time to undo that stuff. If we could do it at the beginning, just like we brush our teeth every day so we don't have to get cavities, right? Like we do these preventative things so that we don't end up having $1,000 dental bill. Well, the same thing for our relationship. If we keep fine-tuning it and working through it together, when it's small stuff, it'll be much easier to navigate with the big stuff. And I always recommend getting some type of support so that the two of you can work through these things now when things feel easier and fresh and not so baked into the relationship. Okay. One thing that I Googled tremendously and didn't find a lot of information about was once you get married, it is really normal to have an increase in conflict. And I think we often think of post-marriage as a honeymoon period. There's the post-marriage honeymoon where everything feels good and you're just in love. But I think what can also happen for so many of us is we're now daunted by this commitment. We're daunted by this thing that we just signed up for. It feels so much more real, so much more solid. And that can be really scary for those of us, particularly that come from some trauma and have felt stuck and have felt helpless before. And so this type of new commitment where you really are committing to each other legally, and now it's going to take a lot of time and thousands of dollars, if not more, to get divorced, like it can bring up a lot of anxiety. And so post wedding arguments, fighting, tension, escalated tension is actually quite normal in relationships. You two are working out this basic anxiety of having committed to each other. And this is totally normal and not talked about. But I think if we can normalize it, then maybe we can spend more time understanding it instead of shaming and guilting ourselves into thinking that there's something wrong here. And instead we can get curious as to why is there increased tension? What is coming up for me around this commitment, this marriage? How is it feeling to be married? What needs attention now? What am I needing from my person and needing from myself now? Yes. Okay, so wow, I just spent 40 minutes talking about marriage. I've been prolonging doing this episode because I didn't know if there was much I could talk about, but I guess I always somehow find ways to talk about things. I hope that this is helpful. Again, this is all coming from my own experience, my own insight, what I have found in my own work and my own journey. And of course, now that we've been married for half a year, there's the conversations that we're having about children. And this is a really interesting place to be at in the world. Women have only had, women and all humans with uteruses have only had control over our reproductive system for the past 60 years. Birth control really completely changed the way that women hold power in our culture. And I think we're still grappling, and probably will for a long time to come, with the repercussions of that, including an increased autonomy in whether or not we have children, versus our biological clock that is telling us that our sole purpose is to have children. I grew up not ever wanting children, not being close to children, not having any relationship of wanting children. And as I'm getting older, I'm like, oh, I could really see how so much of my role is to be a mother and how I want to be a mother. And yet there's so much ambivalence there, because I don't know if I actually want to be a mother. There's a biological clock. There's that place in my brain that's like, mother, mother, mother. And then there's the part of me that's like, I don't know yet. I don't know yet. And I think that we would be kind of remiss to not also talk about what's happening in the world right now. And something that we're grappling with is it ethical to have children right now? Is it inherently selfish to bring children into the world right now? And the answer isn't yes or no. And I don't judge anyone for having children. This is not any statement about other people and children. This is simply what me and my husband are now grappling with and coming to terms with is what is this next chapter look like? And how do we do it responsibly? And what does responsibly look like? And what is the ethical considerations here? There is no right or wrong answer. There's just every individual and their relationship, if they're having a child within a relationship, and what they want to do about it. And thinking about, are there right reasons to have a baby? What are those reasons? Right means right for each of us, not morally right or wrong. Yes? Okay. Ooh. Coming to an end here, y'all. Here's the final kind of things I want you all to think about if you are considering getting married, considering moving into this next chapter. First, you get to define family. I think we put a lot of pressure on our spouses to be our family, but family looks different for each of us. We have our friends that are family. We have our family. We have our chosen family. We have the married family. Family gets to be defined by how we define it. If you have a dog or a cat and that's your family, that is great. That is wonderful. If you have a handful of friends, that's great. That's wonderful. You get to define family. You get to define what marriage looks like for you. You get to define what relationships look like for you, whether that's monogamous or non-monogamous. You get to decide, and the people in your life can help you in that decision, and you can think about it with other people. There is no right or wrong timing, only your timing. So there's no late. You're not late to anything. Just because people's timing look different than yours doesn't mean that your timing is wrong. Being married is not better than not being married. Being divorced is not inferior to being married. Yes, we each have our lives and we each get to decide how we want to navigate it. Okay, and the final thing that I want to leave you all when it comes to this idea of marriage or babies is that no one can tell you what the answer is, because the answer only exists in your heart. You have so many answers within you, and you can trust those answers. You can get guidance, you can get support, you can ask for opinions. At the end of the day, though, the answers lie in you. There is no rush, there is no pressure, there's no expectation. Let things unfold and then go after what you want. And all things will reveal themselves. You know what I mean? There's a beautiful combination between willpower, going after it, making it happen, and letting things evolve and trusting the timing of your life. And if you bring those things together, there will come the magic that is your gorgeous life. Marriage isn't the end all be all, and marriage is a wonderful journey of self-exploration within a relationship. It can offer so much healing, and it can also offer so much conflict. It can be both beautiful and hard. It can be easy, and it can be, challenging. Marriage, relationships, can really invoke within us so much growth. And what is right for you is yours. Yes, all things are coming. Just keep keep going after what you want. Keep telling the world, keep telling yourself, and all of the good things are coming. Okay, I hope that this episode was supportive and helpful for all of you. I'm sending you my love, and I will catch you next week.